Hey there, warriors. Morgan here with Rising Warrior Collective. I am in Portland. It is an absolutely beautiful evening. I am at my friend's house, and she has this beautiful garden and backyard space, and the wind chimes are going in the wind. It's a beautiful evening. I recognized a very obvious theme today in my life and through a couple different clients that I've been chatting with today, all around intuition, and specifically intuition in regards to someone who has been through childhood trauma. So I thought I'd pop in here. I've done a little bit of writing about it today, so if you want to read more or continue digesting on this topic, I wrote a post about it today, and I've posted a few stories all in relation to listening to our intuition and trying to reconnect to it as childhood trauma survivors. I wanted to kind of first start out by chatting a little bit about how intuition shows up, or actually how it's challenging for us to connect to our intuition as childhood trauma survivors, why that is. For many of us, we grew up in families where there was addiction, abuse, narcissistic abuse, neglect, adults who were still living in their trauma, living in unhealed trauma, and our realities were challenged often. So my example is I grew up with an alcoholic mom. She was my main contributor of abuse and neglect growing up. She is who I spent the majority of my time with, and where I really was impacted by her addiction. My mom would show up intoxicated and deny that she was intoxicated. She would laugh at me when I brought it to her attention and asked questions if I were to challenge her. And if I were to continue to push and challenge that, she would typically turn angry or go in the opposite direction and get really into more of her victim mode and make me feel bad or sad or guilty for asking her if she was intoxicated. And many of us who grew up in traumatic childhoods, grew up with traumatized parents, with addicts, we were often challenged in our reality because those adults were struggling with their own addictions, and more often than not, it was them living in denial of their own addictions. So as children who grew up in these environments, we're often made to second guess our intuition, we're made to doubt it, we're made to question our reality. So for many of us, like me, I would watch the adults in my life be intoxicated, be high, be doing things that I knew intuitively, even as a small child, were not okay and they weren't right. But they would come back in this space of denial. They would come back and cause me to doubt the reality that was in front of me. And this went on for me my entire childhood. I continued in this type of relationship with my mom all the way up until 2 years ago when I chose to go no contact with her. So I want to try to help connect the dots between what happened to us in childhood around our intuition being challenged and sort of pushed down. When we're in that state of being a young child and we're reliant on the adults around us, and we recognize that the adults are doing things to put us in danger, but on the other hand, they are denying that they're doing that, our child brain goes into a bit of shock and self-doubt, because if we were to believe our intuition, we know that this adult is intoxicated or there is danger in our environment, but our adult who is taking care of us, our primary caregiver, is denying that that's actually happening. We have to either accept the truth of our intuition, which puts us in a continued space of danger, if I were to listen to my intuition and trust that my mom is indeed intoxicated, that means she is intentionally demanding that I get into a car with her, into a vehicle with her, and we drive while she's intoxicated. That means that my mom is intentionally putting me in danger. And as a small child, that is something that is so overwhelming for our brains to accept and understand, because that means that there's no longer anybody in the picture that's responsible enough to take care of us, that we kind of go to a space in our minds that says we're alone and there's no one in charge. And this is really hard for us as when we were children to distinguish between the two. Do I listen to my intuition and know that this person is not a healthy person for me to be around? Because if I do listen and accept my intuition, I have no way out. There's no exit strategy. This is the person I live with. This is the person that takes care of me, feeds me, houses me. If I accept that they are intentionally putting me into danger, there's nothing I can do about it. So we essentially have our intuition shut down, and we have to shut it down because it continues to create unsafe environment for us as children. So our logic kicks in and says, you know, there's no way she can be lying. You have to be wrong. There's no way that she would sit and tell you that she's not intoxicated. If she was, she wouldn't put your life in danger. It's too much for our little brains, our childlike brains, to comprehend and accept. So because the adults in our lives put us into this position, it caused us to really, really second guess our internal belief system, our intuition. So if you're finding yourself in a space as an adult now where you are constantly in a state of questioning your intuition, wondering if it's right, kind of in this battle between my head and my heart, like my gut is telling me this, but my logical brain says this, and the two don't match up. Our logical brain is typically looking at the bigger perspective of what's going to be the decision that keeps us safe, that keeps us comfortable, that keeps us from having to change too much, whereas our intuition is not thinking about any of those things. Our intuition is literally thinking about what's the best next move for me. And as adults who have been through childhood trauma, it's really hard to distinguish between the two and know where our intuition is pointing us. And I just want to acknowledge that that's a normal place to be, that that's understandable. And one way to look at that is if you spent the first 16 to 18 years of your life, depending on, you know, when you got out of your family trauma, if you're still in it, you might still be in this space with your adults, with your parents who took care of you as a kid. So this might still be happening for you. But however that, like, those younger developmental years, where however many years you spent in a family or in a growing up environment where everyone around you caused you to doubt your intuition, you had to push it down in order to protect yourself and go into safety mode. Imagine if connecting those dots between that's how we grew up, that's how we were modeled, that's what we learned for the first 18 years of our lives, and nobody at 18, it's not like we were just sent out into the adult world at 18 and all of a sudden we got all the information. We got all of the downloaded correct way of like being able to step out into the world. We stepped out into the world as trauma survivors. We stepped out into the world with our programming from childhood. And we continued to do the same thing because that's what saved us. Those protective mechanisms of shutting down our intuition got us out of that, got us through that space. We survived it and we got out into the world. So that's what we know to do now, and that's what we're typically continuing to do. So I want to just acknowledge that if those things are still coming up for you, if you're still struggling with connecting to your intuition, if you're still struggling to know when is this my head and my heart, and if I'm feeling this so strongly, why am I doubting following my gut instinct? Like, why is this so hard? Why am I constantly in battle with myself? know that it's understandable and it's normal. It's a normal response to an